I have to ask, is this vehicle registered in your name?
It is. Is there anything else, officer?
I'm asking you again, whose vehicle is this? Step away from the car, hands where I can see them. It's my car. You can't just assume I don't belong here. I haven't done anything wrong.
I was wrong, Marcus, and I deeply regret how I handled things. I hope you can understand that I am truly trying to learn from this. I hear you, Ethan. Thank you.
You own that Lamborghini? The question cut through the warm Texas afternoon like a siren, loud enough to make strangers stop and look. A few heads turned. A few phones came out. And in less than 10 seconds, a routine traffic stop was becoming something far bigger than anyone expected. The flashing blue and red lights reflected across the polished yellow paint of the Lamborghini Aventador parked near the entrance of an upscale shopping district just outside Dallas. The supercar looked almost unreal beneath the late afternoon sun, its sharp angles gleaming against rows of luxury storefronts and carefully trimmed palm trees. Standing beside the driver's door was Marcus Johnson, a 38-year-old black man wearing dark jeans, a fitted charcoal jacket, and a simple silver watch. He kept both hands visible and his expression calm, but his eyes followed every movement of the officer standing in front of him. Officer Ethan Brooks adjusted the radio clip to his shoulder and slowly looked Marcus up and down. His gaze lingered for a moment before drifting back toward the Lamborghini. Then he let out a short laugh. "That your car?" he asked. Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir." The officer glanced at the vehicle again. A Lamborghini Aventador costs more than most houses around here. A few nearby shoppers slowed their pace. A woman carrying designer bags stopped near a fountain. Two teenagers sitting outside a coffee shop immediately turned their phones toward the scene. Marcus noticed them, but said nothing. Years had taught him that some situations only became worse when pride entered the conversation. Officer Brooks walked around the front of the vehicle, inspecting it as if he expected to find something wrong simply because it existed. The polished wheels sparkled beneath the sunlight. The registration sticker was current. The license plate matched the state records already visible on his patrol tablet. Yet something about the scene clearly bothered him. He returned to Marcus and folded his arms. "Mind telling me what you do for a living?" The question hung in the air. Marcus remained polite. "I work in technology." Brooks smirked. "Technology, huh?" The crowd had grown larger now. Not huge, just enough to create an audience. People paused near storefront windows. Some pretended to check messages while secretly listening. Others openly watched. Marcus could feel their eyes, but he refused to look away from the officer. The Texas heat rolled across the pavement in gentle waves. Somewhere nearby, a fountain splashed softly. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the cafe patio. It should have been an ordinary afternoon. Instead, an uncomfortable silence settled over the sidewalk. Officer Brooks shook his head and looked back at the Lamborghini. "Funny thing," he said. "Most people driving cars like this don't usually fit the picture." Marcus heard the words. He understood exactly what they meant, but his face never changed. The officer waited for a reaction. He didn't get one. Marcus simply stood there beneath the sunlight, calm and composed, while more phones appeared among the gathering crowd. And as the flashing patrol lights reflected across the Lamborghini's windshield, nobody watching could have guessed that the truth behind Marcus Johnson was about to change everything. Officer Brooks slipped his patrol tablet from its mount and studied the screen again, as though staring longer might produce a different answer. The registration still showed the same result. The vehicle was legally registered. The license plate matched. There were no alerts, no warrants, no reports connected to the car. Yet something in his expression suggested he was not satisfied. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. A delivery driver leaned against his truck. Several shoppers paused near the entrance of a luxury watch store. Even the barista standing behind the coffee shop window seemed distracted by whatever was unfolding outside. Marcus Johnson remained exactly where he was. Calm, patient, silent. He could feel the attention from every direction, but he had experienced moments like this before. Different cities, different faces, different circumstances. The same assumptions, the same questions hidden behind polite words. A light breeze moved across the shopping plaza, carrying the scent of fresh-cut landscaping and warm pavement. Somewhere overhead, a jet traced a white line across the bright Texas sky. It was the kind of afternoon that should have felt peaceful. Instead, tension lingered beneath every glance. Officer Brooks finally looked up from the screen. Technology is a pretty broad field, he said. What exactly does that mean? Marcus answered evenly. I own a software company. The officer raised an eyebrow. You own it? Yes, sir. A few people exchanged looks. One teenager lowered his phone and whispered something to his friend. The friend laughed quietly. Brooks noticed it too. His jaw tightened. That must be some software company. Marcus simply nodded. It does well. The officer walked another slow circle around the Lamborghini. The yellow paint reflected the storefronts like polished glass. Every angle of the vehicle seemed designed to attract attention. Marcus had never bought it to impress anyone. In fact, he rarely drove it. Most days he preferred a simple SUV. But this afternoon he had been returning from a charity luncheon downtown and had decided to enjoy the drive. Now he regretted that decision. Brooks stopped near the rear of the vehicle and folded his arms again. You know, he said loudly enough for nearby people to hear, we get reports all the time about suspicious vehicles in this area. Marcus met his gaze. I understand. Do you? Brooks asked. Because people around here work hard for what they have. The statement lingered in the air. Marcus noticed several faces in the crowd suddenly become uncomfortable. A middle-aged woman standing beside the fountain frowned slightly. Even she seemed to recognize what was happening. Marcus took a slow breath. His father had taught him something decades earlier in a small apartment on the south side of Atlanta. Never argue with someone determined to misunderstand you. Let time reveal character. Let facts reveal truth. The lesson had carried him through school, through business, through rooms where people doubted him before hearing a single word. It carried him now. I agree, Marcus replied. People do work hard. Brooks seemed disappointed by the lack of confrontation. He tapped the side of his radio and glanced toward a second patrol unit that had just entered the parking lot. The vehicle rolled slowly toward them before stopping nearby. Another officer stepped out. Younger, quieter. He looked from Marcus to the Lamborghini and then to Brooks. Everything good? The younger officer asked. Just checking a few things, Brooks answered. Marcus noticed the younger officer briefly glance at the registration information visible on the tablet. Something flashed across his face. Confusion, then curiosity, as if he already knew there was no real issue. The crowd sensed it too. Yet nobody left. They stayed because something about the situation felt unfinished. Like the first chapter of a story that had not yet reached its turning point. And standing beneath the bright Texas sun, surrounded by strangers and flashing lights, Marcus had the strange feeling that the afternoon was about to become far more complicated than anyone expected. The younger officer introduced himself as Officer Ryan Miller and stepped closer to Brooks, lowering his voice just enough that most of the crowd could not hear. Most of the crowd, but not all. A few words drifted through the warm air. Registration valid. Ownership confirmed. No alerts. No issues. Marcus caught the brief exchange and noticed something change in Ryan's expression. The younger officer seemed uncomfortable. Not nervous. Just uncertain why the stop was continuing. Brooks listened, nodded once, then looked back toward Marcus as if he had already decided what he wanted to believe. The crowd sensed it too. The atmosphere had shifted. What had started as curiosity was slowly becoming something else. People were no longer wondering whether Marcus owned the car. They were beginning to wonder why the questioning had not ended. A silver-haired man standing outside a nearby steakhouse folded his arms and watched carefully. A woman carrying shopping bags exchanged glances with her husband. Several phones remained pointed toward the scene. Marcus could hear notification sounds as clips were uploaded and shared in real time. The internet moved fast. Faster than most people realized. Brooks walked toward the driver's side door and peered through the window. The interior looked immaculate. Black leather, carbon fiber accents, every surface spotless. He circled the vehicle again, searching for something that would justify his instincts. Marcus remained patient. Years earlier, patience had not come naturally. Back when he was 22 and working 2 jobs while attending night classes, moments like this would have left him angry. But success had changed him. Not because money solved problems. It did not. Success simply taught him that dignity was more valuable than winning an argument. He had spent years building software platforms from a rented apartment. Years surviving investor meetings where people seemed surprised that he was the founder rather than an employee. Years proving himself in rooms where assumptions entered before introductions. This moment felt familiar. Different setting. Same story. Brooks finally stopped near the front bumper and looked directly at Marcus. You said you own a software company. What kind of company? Marcus answered calmly. Artificial intelligence systems for hospitals and emergency response networks. A few people nearby exchanged surprised looks. Brooks did not react. Sounds impressive. The words carried little warmth. How many employees? About 600. That answer finally drew visible reactions. Someone quietly whistled. Another person lowered their phone and stared. Ryan Miller looked at Marcus again, this time with genuine curiosity. Brooks remained expressionless. 600 employees, he repeated. Marcus nodded. Across 4 states. Silence settled briefly over the sidewalk. The fountain continued splashing nearby. Cars rolled through the shopping center parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the hour. Yet around the Lamborghini, everything felt suspended. Brooks tapped the side of his tablet once more. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. A new notification had appeared on the screen. Marcus could not see it, but Ryan apparently could. The younger officer's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. He looked at Marcus, then back at the tablet, then at Brooks. Whatever had appeared was unexpected. Brooks stared at the screen longer than before. The confidence that had defined his posture since the beginning seemed less certain now. Not gone, just cracked. Ryan shifted his weight. Sir, he said carefully. Brooks did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the information in front of him. Around them, the crowd grew quieter. Even the people recording seemed to sense that something important had just changed. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the Lamborghini's windshield and across Brooks's face. For the first time since the stop began, Marcus noticed hesitation in the officer's eyes. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the story was finally beginning to move in a direction nobody standing there expected. Officer Brooks continued staring at the screen as though the information displayed there had arrived from another world. The crowd waited. The younger officer waited. Even Marcus found himself curious about which detail had finally interrupted the certainty that had fueled the entire encounter. A notification tone sounded from the tablet again. Brooks swallowed once before turning the device slightly away from public view. Ryan Miller leaned closer. His eyes moved across the screen. Then he exhaled quietly. Sir, he said, choosing his words carefully, you may want to take another look at the profile. Brooks did not answer. The sunlight reflected off the tablet glass, forcing him to adjust the angle. Marcus noticed the officer's posture changing by degrees. The confidence was still there, but now it shared space with uncertainty. Around them, people continued recording. The fountain splashed softly behind the gathering crowd. A warm breeze carried the distant sound of traffic from the highway a few miles away. Yet the center of everyone's attention remained fixed on one patrol tablet. Finally, Brooks looked up. Marcus Johnson, he said slowly. That is your full legal name? Yes, sir. And this company listed here belongs to you? Yes, sir. Brooks glanced down again. Johnson Emergency Systems. Marcus nodded. That is correct. The name meant nothing to most people standing nearby. Several shoppers exchanged puzzled looks. One teenager shrugged, but Ryan Miller clearly recognized it. His eyebrows lifted immediately. Wait, Ryan said before stopping himself. Brooks shot him a quick look. The younger officer fell silent, though his expression revealed more than words could. Marcus understood. Johnson Emergency Systems was not a household name. Most people never noticed the technology working behind the scenes during emergencies. That was the point. When systems functioned properly, nobody paid attention. But hospitals, ambulance dispatch centers, and disaster response teams across multiple states depended on the software every day. Brooks studied the screen once more. Your company provides emergency coordination systems? Marcus nodded. Among other things. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. The answer matched the profile in front of him. Every detail matched. Revenue figures, corporate headquarters, state contracts, awards, public records, years of verified information. Nothing suggested fraud. Nothing suggested deception. Nothing suggested that Marcus was anything other than exactly who he claimed to be. Yet Brooks seemed unable to let go of the picture he had formed when he first saw a black man standing beside an exotic car. The silence stretched. Then a new sound rolled across the parking lot. Several people turned their heads at once. Marcus heard it too. Multiple engines approaching from the main entrance road. Not police vehicles. Something else. A line of black SUVs moved slowly into the shopping center. Clean. Professional. Coordinated. They passed between rows of parked cars and headed directly toward the crowd. Conversations immediately broke out among the onlookers. Some stepped aside. Others raised their phones higher. Ryan Miller looked toward the approaching vehicles and frowned. Brooks followed his gaze. The first SUV stopped near the fountain. Then another. Then a third. Uniformed drivers stepped out and moved toward the passenger doors. Marcus recognized the vehicles immediately. His expression remained calm, but inside he sighed. The timing could not have been worse. Brooks watched the scene unfold with growing confusion. "Do you know those people?" he asked. Marcus answered honestly. "Yes, sir." Before Brooks could ask another question, the rear door of the lead SUV opened. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit stepped out. Several members of the crowd gasped quietly. More than one person recognized him instantly. The man scanned the area until his eyes landed on Marcus. Then he smiled and started walking directly toward him. Brooks turned back toward the tablet, then toward Marcus, then toward the approaching man. For the first time since the stop began, he looked completely unsure of what was happening. And as the crowd parted to make way for the newcomer, the entire balance of the afternoon began shifting in a direction Officer Brooks had never anticipated. The man in the navy suit moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized. Conversations faded as he approached. Several people immediately knew who he was. Others recognized him a moment later when whispers began spreading from one side of the plaza to the other. Marcus remained calm as always, but the man greeted him with a warm smile and extended his hand. "Marcus, there you are," he said. "We have been trying to reach you for the last 20 minutes. Marcus shook his hand. "Sorry about that. My phone has been on silent." The man laughed lightly before noticing the patrol vehicles, the crowd, and the dozens of phones pointed toward them. His smile faded. "Is there a problem?" Officer Brooks stepped forward. "And you are?" The man turned politely. "Daniel Whitaker." Several people in the crowd reacted instantly. Daniel Whitaker was not merely another businessman. He was the mayor of Dallas. The realization moved through the gathering crowd like a sudden wind. Phones lifted higher. People exchanged stunned looks. Brooks blinked. Ryan Miller looked from the mayor to Marcus and back again. The mayor nodded toward Marcus. "This gentleman is one of the reasons our emergency response modernization project succeeded." Brooks remained silent. Daniel continued. "Without his company, several hospitals across North Texas would still be operating on systems that belong in the last decade." The crowd grew noticeably quieter. Marcus shifted slightly, looking uncomfortable with the attention. He had never enjoyed public recognition. Years of success had not changed that. Daniel smiled again. "In fact, I was on my way to meet him. We have a ceremony beginning in less than an hour." Brooks glanced at the tablet in his hand, then at Marcus, then at the mayor. The certainty that had carried him through the stop was disappearing faster now. Ryan carefully looked over Brooks's shoulder. Another section of Marcus's profile had become visible. Awards, public service citations, community grants, state partnerships. Brooks stared at the information as though seeing it for the first time. Daniel noticed the expression. "Officer, is everything all right?" The question was polite, but it carried weight. Brooks cleared his throat. "Routine verification." Daniel nodded slowly. "I see." His eyes moved toward the Lamborghini, then toward Marcus, then toward the crowd. He appeared to understand far more than Brooks had explained. A few feet away, an elderly woman standing beside the fountain spoke quietly to her husband. "I knew something felt wrong about this." Nearby, a college student lowered her phone and shook her head. The mood was changing. People were no longer curious about Marcus. They were beginning to question the assumptions that had placed him here in the first place. Then another vehicle entered the plaza. A black SUV with the logo of a local television station on the side. Reporters had arrived. Someone must have recognized the mayor's motorcade. Within moments, a camera crew emerged and started setting up near the sidewalk. Brooks noticed them immediately. So did everyone else. The afternoon had officially become public. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Daniel folded his hands. Marcus remained composed. Yet despite everything already revealed, the most surprising detail had not surfaced yet. The notification Ryan had noticed earlier was still sitting on the tablet screen. A highlighted section Brooks had not wanted anyone else to see. Slowly, Ryan looked at the information once more. His eyes widened again, this time even more than before. He looked toward Marcus with genuine astonishment, then toward the mayor. Finally, he turned to Brooks and spoke quietly enough that only a few nearby people could hear. "Sir," he said, "I do not think you realize who he really is." For a moment, nobody spoke. The fountain continued its steady rhythm. The television crew adjusted a camera lens. A flag above a nearby storefront shifted gently in the warm breeze. Yet the silence surrounding Officer Brooks felt heavier than any sound. Ryan Miller swallowed and pointed discreetly toward the highlighted section of the profile on the tablet. Brooks looked down again. The information had been sitting there the entire time. He had simply been too focused on proving himself right to truly read it. Marcus watched quietly as realization began spreading across the officer's face. Not dramatic, not immediate, more like the slow movement of a shadow across a room. Daniel Whitaker noticed it too. "What is it?" the mayor asked. Ryan hesitated before answering. "Sir, the community center opening today." Daniel nodded. "Of course." Ryan looked at Marcus, then back at the mayor. "The center is named after him." Several nearby people overheard the exchange. Confused expressions appeared instantly. A young reporter lowered her microphone. An older man standing near the fountain leaned forward. Daniel smiled. "That is correct." The mayor turned toward the crowd. Marcus never wanted publicity for it, but yes, the Johnson Community Technology Center. Murmurs spread through the plaza. Some people recognized the name immediately. Others remembered recent news coverage about a new educational facility opening on the south side of the city. A place designed to provide technology training, scholarships, and career opportunities for thousands of students who otherwise might never have access to them. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Recognition always made him uneasy. He preferred solving problems behind the scenes. Daniel continued. He personally funded most of the project. A woman near the front of the crowd covered her mouth. One of the television reporters looked stunned. Even Ryan Miller seemed impressed. Brooks remained motionless. The sunlight reflected across the screen of his tablet as he scrolled further. More details appeared. Scholarship programs, youth mentorship initiatives, hospital technology grants, emergency response partnerships, millions of dollars invested back into communities throughout Texas. Every new line felt heavier than the last. Marcus was not simply a successful entrepreneur. He had spent years helping people most of the city would never know. The realization settled over the crowd like a quiet wave. Suddenly, the Lamborghini mattered less. The wealth mattered less. The entire conversation that had started this afternoon now felt small compared to the larger picture standing in front of them. Marcus glanced toward the television crew. More reporters were arriving now. Their vehicles lined the edge of the parking lot. News traveled quickly when public officials and unexpected stories collided. Daniel folded his hands. "The ceremony starts in 40 minutes, he said. "There will be over 500 students attending. Some of them are receiving scholarships directly funded through Marcus's foundation." Brooks lowered the tablet slightly. His face had changed completely. The skepticism was gone. In its place sat something far more uncomfortable. Reflection. Around them, the crowd seemed to feel it too. Nobody appeared interested in the car anymore. Nobody cared about luxury or status. The real story had become something else entirely. Marcus looked toward the sky for a moment. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent. Golden light stretched across the storefront windows and danced across the polished surface of the Lamborghini. He thought about his father again, the man who had worked long shifts cleaning office buildings while teaching his son that character mattered more than appearances. The man who never lived long enough to see any of this. If he were here now, he would probably tell Marcus the same thing he always had. Stay calm. Stay kind. Let truth do the work. And standing in the middle of that crowded plaza, surrounded by cameras, officials, and strangers, Marcus knew the truth had finally arrived. The silence that followed felt different now. It was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence that arrives when people realize they have misunderstood someone completely. Officer Brooks stood beside his patrol vehicle holding the tablet loosely at his side. The flashing lights that had seemed so important earlier now felt almost irrelevant. Around him, the crowd continued to grow. Reporters adjusted microphones. Cameras pointed toward Marcus. Yet Marcus himself remained exactly the same. calm, polite, unmoved by either criticism or praise. Daniel Whitaker looked at his watch before turning back toward the gathering crowd. Most people do not know this, he said, his voice carrying easily across the plaza. But 3 years ago, when severe storms overwhelmed emergency services across North Texas, Marcus and his team worked around the clock for almost a week helping hospitals coordinate patient transfers. They did not charge the city a single dollar. Several reporters immediately began writing notes. Others exchanged surprised looks. Brooks slowly lifted the tablet again. More information appeared with each page he opened. Public records, community partnerships, educational grants. Then he reached a section that made him stop completely. His eyes narrowed. He read it once. Then again. Ryan Miller noticed the reaction. What is it? Brooks hesitated before turning the screen slightly. Ryan's eyes widened almost immediately. The younger officer looked toward Marcus in disbelief. The highlighted section described a statewide scholarship fund established 5 years earlier. Thousands of students had received financial assistance through the program. Many came from working-class families. Some were children of first responders. Others were children of police officers. Daniel noticed their expressions and smiled faintly. You found that part. Brooks looked up. The Scholarship Foundation? Daniel nodded. Yes. The mayor folded his hands. Marcus started it after his father passed away. The crowd listened carefully. His father spent most of his life working maintenance jobs. Marcus wanted young people from difficult backgrounds to have opportunities his family never had. Brooks stared at Marcus. The weight of the realization seemed heavier now. Marcus had spent years investing in communities, schools, hospitals, and emergency services. Yet he had stood patiently through every assumption made about him that afternoon. Daniel continued. Do you know how many police families have benefited from that scholarship fund? Brooks remained silent. The mayor answered the question himself. More than 400. The words landed with unexpected force. Ryan looked down at the tablet again. Brooks did not move. Somewhere behind the crowd, a television camera zoomed closer. A reporter quietly repeated the number to her producer. 400 families. 400 students. 400 futures changed. Marcus glanced toward the ground for a moment. He never enjoyed discussing charitable work publicly. To him, helping people was not a performance. It was simply the right thing to do. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, bathing the plaza in warm gold light. Reflections shimmered across storefront windows. The fountain sparkled behind the crowd. For a moment, everything seemed strangely still. Then an older man stepped forward from the crowd. His gray hair caught the sunlight as he removed a baseball cap and held it respectfully against his chest. My granddaughter received one of those scholarships, he said. His voice trembled slightly. Without it, she never would have gone to college. Marcus looked surprised. The man smiled. She graduates next spring. More silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Something deeper. Something human. Brooks lowered his gaze. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed less concerned with the crowd and more concerned with himself. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. The man he had questioned was not merely successful. He was someone who had spent years lifting others up, including people connected to the very profession Brooks represented. And standing there beneath the fading Texas sun, surrounded by witnesses, cameras, and the undeniable weight of reality, Officer Brooks finally understood that the biggest mistake made that day had never been about a car. The crowd remained unusually quiet. Nobody seemed eager to leave anymore. The story unfolding in front of them had become bigger than a traffic stop, bigger than a luxury car, bigger than a misunderstanding. The afternoon sun cast long golden reflections across the pavement as Officer Brooks slowly stepped forward. For several seconds, he searched for the right words. None came easily. The cameras were still recording. The reporters were still watching. Yet it no longer felt like he was standing in front of a crowd. It felt as though he was standing alone with the truth. Marcus waited patiently. He had no desire to embarrass anyone. He never had. Daniel Whitaker noticed the silence and wisely chose not to interrupt it. Some lessons could not be delivered by politicians, reporters, or public applause. They had to arrive naturally. Brooks finally cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him. The officer's voice was noticeably different now. The sharp edges were gone. I owe you an apology. A ripple moved through the crowd. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. They simply listened. Brooks glanced briefly at the ground before continuing. When I first saw you standing next to that vehicle, I made assumptions." He paused. Assumptions I should not have made. The words hung in the warm evening air. Marcus remained calm. Brooks took a slow breath. "I told myself I was being cautious. I told myself I was doing my job. But the truth is that I saw what I expected to see instead of what was actually in front of me." Several people lowered their phones. The moment felt less like a public confrontation and more like a personal reckoning. Marcus studied the officer's face. For the first time all afternoon, he saw sincerity there. Not defensiveness. Not excuses. Sincerity. Daniel folded his hands and remained silent. Even the reporters seemed reluctant to interrupt. Brooks continued. "I looked at your car before I looked at your character. I looked at your appearance before I looked at the facts." His voice softened further. That was wrong. The fountain splashed gently behind them. A light breeze moved across the plaza. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell echoed faintly through the city. Marcus thought about all the moments in his life that had led to this one. The interviews where people assumed he was not the founder. The meetings where people spoke to his assistants instead of him. The countless occasions when expectations arrived before introductions. He could have responded with anger. Many people would have understood if he did. Instead, he offered a small nod. "I appreciate that, officer." Brooks looked relieved, but still uncomfortable. "I am not proud of how this started." Marcus smiled faintly. Most important lessons do not start comfortably. A few people in the crowd nodded. The simplicity of the answer seemed to catch everyone off guard. Brooks looked at him carefully. "You could be angry." Marcus glanced toward the community center documents still visible on the tablet screen. Then toward the crowd. Then toward the mayor. "Maybe," he said. "But anger rarely teaches people anything." The words settled over the plaza. Daniel smiled. Ryan Miller smiled too. Brooks looked away for a moment, visibly reflecting on what he had heard. Marcus continued. "The problem was never the questions. Questions are part of your job. The problem was deciding who I was before hearing the answers." The officer nodded slowly. There was no argument left. No defense left. Only understanding. As the sunlight continued fading across the city, something unexpected happened. The crowd that had gathered to witness embarrassment instead witnessed grace. And in that quiet moment, Marcus Johnson demonstrated the same quality that had built his reputation, funded scholarships, helped communities, and changed lives for years. He chose dignity when resentment would have been easier. The ceremony began just as the sun settled low over the Dallas skyline. The motorcade departed the shopping plaza, and much of the crowd followed the news crews toward the newly completed community center on the south side of the city. Less than an hour later, hundreds of students filled the courtyard outside the modern glass building. Families gathered beneath rows of blue and white banners. Teachers, city officials, volunteers, and local business leaders stood together as evening light washed across the polished stone entrance. Above the main doors, large silver letters reflected the sunset. Johnson Community Technology Center. Marcus stood quietly near the side of the stage while students laughed, talked, and took photographs. Many of them had no idea that the man standing a few feet away was the reason they were there. They only knew that scholarships were being awarded, computers were being donated, and opportunities were being created. Daniel Whitaker stepped to the podium first. His voice carried across the courtyard as he welcomed the crowd. He spoke about education. He spoke about perseverance. He spoke about communities investing in their own future. Then he invited Marcus to join him. The applause began immediately. It rolled across the courtyard like a wave. Students stood. Parents stood. Teachers stood. The sound seemed endless. Marcus walked toward the stage with the same calm expression he had worn all afternoon. No arrogance. No celebration. Just quiet gratitude. As he reached the podium, his eyes moved across the crowd. He saw young faces filled with hope. He saw parents holding back tears. He saw teachers smiling proudly. Then, near the back of the gathering, he noticed a familiar figure. Officer Ethan Brooks stood alone beside one of the courtyard walkways. He was no longer surrounded by flashing lights or authority. He was simply another person listening. Their eyes met briefly. Brooks gave a small nod. Marcus returned it. Nothing more was needed. The lesson had already been learned. Marcus stepped forward and looked out at the students. For a moment, he said nothing. The courtyard became completely still. Even the evening breeze seemed to pause. "When I was young," he began, "my father worked long hours so our family could keep moving forward. He taught me something I never forgot. He said that your circumstances may introduce you to the world, but your character tells people who you really are. The crowd listened carefully. Marcus smiled. This building is not about me. It belongs to every student standing here. It belongs to every family that refused to give up. It belongs to every person willing to work for a future that others might not see yet. Applause returned, softer this time, filled with emotion rather than excitement. As the ceremony continued, scholarships were awarded. Students crossed the stage. Families celebrated. Photographs captured moments that would be remembered for years. Slowly, the sky shifted from gold to deep blue. Lights around the courtyard flickered on. By the end of the evening, most of the crowd had departed. The reporters packed away their equipment. The city officials headed home. The parking lot gradually emptied. Marcus remained for a few minutes longer. Standing near the entrance, he looked up at the building one last time. The glass reflected the first stars appearing overhead. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed softly through the city. Behind him, a group of students walked toward their cars carrying scholarship folders and smiling with excitement about the future. Marcus listened to their voices and smiled. Then he quietly turned and walked toward the parking lot. The evening air felt cool against his face. The day had begun with judgment and assumptions. It ended with opportunity and understanding. And as he disappeared into the night beneath the glow of the city lights, the only thing left behind was the quiet certainty that kindness had proven stronger than prejudice, and truth had spoken louder than appearances.